Begin. Are you feeling stressed out, perhaps being overwhelmed by anxiety, trepidation of things to come? Then go to guidedhypnotic.com and download your free guided hypnotic meditation. That's guidedhypnotic.com. So that is my, I self-sponsor at the moment. So
Cool.
All right, so here we go.
Yeah.
Stephen Wolf, also known simply as Wolf, is one of the world's most in-demand studio musicians. His discography includes numerous #1, gold, platinum, and Grammy-winning records, a virtuoso drummer, and a world-class programmer with an encyclopedic musical vocabulary spanning every musical genre. His distinctive skill set and versatility have made him the go-to rhythm solution for a long list of the world's top recording artists and producers. In addition to drumming and programming, he's also an accomplished producer, songwriter, and remixer. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring to you the Wolf.
Thanks.
OMG. So, dude, my brother from another mother, we can definitely go back and share. We've known each other for perhaps half of our lifetimes. Almost.
I want to say almost, yeah, because we didn't really start working together till I stopped touring, because that's when I was just focusing.
That's true. All right. So we knew of each other and then started working closely together.
But more than a third.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
So we've been some late nights in the studio and cranking out some amazing music. So I always thought you were a virtuoso, but I forgot you went to Berkeley and like you are super classically trained. Like you're no joke.
Yeah, I mean, well, thanks. I got most of my training pre-Berkeley through having access to great private teachers as a kid in Philly, in the Philly area, and just growing. There's such great talent in Philly. I grew up playing with a lot of musicians like Billy Mann, somebody that you know through our old school friends. We were in bands together in junior high and high school, and a bunch of other that went on to be successful also. We all came up playing together. So by the time I got to Berkeley, I wasn't even planning on going, but my parents insisted that all of their kids, it was the immigrant thing, like, you're all going to college, you're going to do better than we did. And I just wanted to move to New York or LA and just continue playing in bands and making a name for myself. And the compromise was I go to Berkeley, but I already knew that if I went to Berkeley, I wasn't going to graduate. So I just stuck to that. I didn't sign up for a wide enough range of classes to be able to graduate. I just focused on the things I wanted to get together while I was there. But I mostly went there to network and play with people, which is what happened and got me to my first like major label gig. And then I dropped out.
How long did you go?
2.5 semesters.
Okay.
Yeah.
So prior to that, you were already starting to gain momentum and in the industry and so forth. Like you were playing with Billy and all those guys prior to that.
I mean, that was like in high school. And if not looking back, if we had just stayed, if I had stayed in any one of the bands I was in and we all stayed in Philly, like we all would have gone on to make something happen, but we all kind of were going on our separate trajectories. And then some of us have kind of come back together. And I just did a record with Billy that he doesn't produce as much anymore. He's more an executive at this point and a manager and a publisher, but he still produces certain projects. So I still work with him, which is a trip. But I wanted to say something before we get further into it.
Yeah.
When the industry started changing and budgets started dropping, and Jive, a guy we were working with, insisted I get my own Pro Tools because it cost money for me to just show up to whatever studio, where Dream Factory or wherever, for me to just bring my MPC and print stems for you guys. He was like, you should be able to do this from home. Right. And you, more than anybody else, helped me get over the Pro Tools learning curve. Because when I first got it, I was so resistant. I didn't even want to get Pro Tools. And do you remember when Pro Tools went from being like unaffordable for basic, mostly unaffordable, like you needed to have a huge budget.
Right.
And then they came out with Pro Tools LE.
Right.
And
yes.
Which was the first time you could get into Pro Tools for like $1,000.
Yep.
And I think LE came with like 24 tracks for 16. before
it wasn't full. Yeah.
Yeah, but you came to my place, you like walked me through everything, and you were like, yeah, call me anytime, and I called you randomly, and I was like, hey man, what's this again? And that was a game changer. So thank you. And anytime I convince friends of mine, artists I work with, to get their own Pro Tools rig, I'm like, just get it, call me, call everybody else you know. That's how I learned, and I always think of you when I.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah, so,
I'm tickled because like it's as you know, my role in life has always been to do whatever I can to add value, and if that's something I did that added value, then awesome. I do remember that, and I thought you were just calling to hang out, but apparently you just wanted me for my skills. I know. So interesting. So question.
Yeah.
As a drummer, and like you and Joe Franco are very similar in you were early adopters in technology. Was that, were you able to translate that same adoption from going to playing live drums to programming drums to go, okay, well, I guess I got to learn a new technology?
Yeah. Yeah.
What was it like when you switched over to started learning like programming versus playing?
I started early enough, and the thing is, getting into Pro Tools, now I'm glad I did, because I program in Pro Tools. I haven't touched an MPC or any other like hardware in I don't know how long. But when I got into programming, I was still in high school.
Oh, and, wow. Okay.
It happened for organic reasons, because I was very into, at that point, I was already seriously working towards the 10,000 hours of just drums practice and performance. And so I was like really nerding out hard I got to a certain point, like a lot of kids, I was listening to what was on the radio. And then as a drummer, when I wanted to get better, I realized I needed to kind of get more into like all the master drummers were jazz drummers, jazz and fusion drummers. So I was going really hard in that direction, but I was still also listening to the radio. So I only learned this term recently. Sorry, our dog freaked out. Lobo.
It's not your fish?
Yes. So I was listening. I had passive influences. Like I was actively studying and transcribing my favorite jazz, like quote unquote virtuoso drummers, but also I was learning a lot from just listening to whatever was on like classic rock or modern alternative rock radio at the time. But like drummers who just knew how to play songs, who may have known how to, there were master drummers that, like Steve Smith, for example, in Journey, was a virtuoso drummer, but like I was picking up his shit, and Ringo, Bonham, people that I didn't necessarily, it wasn't so complex I had to transcribe it, but I was just absorbing it by listening to the music. And then same thing with drum machines, because I was also listening before hip hop was even called hip hop. It was just on R&B radio stations. You were hearing more drum machines on parts. And then when they were still called rap, they would like the R&B stations, before they switched to hip hop and R&B, they would have like an hour a day of early hip hop stuff.
Right.
And so I was just kind of like absorbing what drum programming sounded like. And I remember the first record I heard, I had a lot of jobs growing up before I was making money in music full time. Among them, I was scooping ice cream at Baskin Robbins. And I remember we would just keep the radio on. And I remember hearing Run DMC, and you were on that session with Run, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So, but I remember hearing Sucker MCs, which was one of the first tracks, like hits I heard, that was nothing but vocals and a drum machine, and a very simple drum machine part of that. And I remember hearing that, because a lot of the other stuff I heard, I was like, well, I can play that stuff on a drum set, but these were sounds that, like, to really make it sound the way it sounded in the production, I would need a drum machine. So I decided I was going to save up and buy my first drum machine. So I was already, and I did, and I taught myself to program. So I was already programming in high school. And then by the time I was at Berkeley, I was still doing some programming. And then when I got my first touring gig, one of the reasons I got the gig was because I had to know how to play along with the sequencer. and also
and control it,
and that,
probably.
yeah, control it. Well, actually, on that gig, I wasn't. The keyboard player was controlling it,
Huh.
but I did have to get my own pad controller to trigger certain sounds, and then that led to when that artist was doing his next record, he let me co-write some stuff where I started a song with a program, with a drum programming, and then he and my friend Dave DeLome, the keyboard player in that band at the time, they would write on top of the beat that I programmed, and so yeah, that was my first major label songwriting credit was because I programmed a beat. So
do you remember your first drum machine?
yes, it
Do
was
you still have
Yamaha. No, I wish I did. It was like a poor man's Lindrum, because the Lindrums at probably 5 Gs or something back then. So my first drum machine was like $300, and it took me months of like working every day after school and weekends to save up for that. And it was a Yamaha RX series. They made like an RX 15, 21, and 11, I think, with a 3. And I had the mid-level one. I couldn't afford the I think higher level had a few more sounds on it. But yeah, it was just it was basically, and you couldn't load your own sounds. I don't think. It just came with the sounds it came with. You could tune them. It could store a certain amount of programs, and then you can combine programs into like a song form.
So the people you were around at that time,
yeah,
were they also, because you said you were one of the reasons why you got the gig was because you adopted the new technology.
Yeah.
Did you get any resistance from any of your other musician or drummer friends, like, oh, that ain't real, and like give you a hard time?
Not so much, because I was still doing it on. It was more like, as a drummer, I was bulletproof. You know what I mean? If I was relying solely on the electronic thing, yeah, then maybe I would have caught some flack. But I was always primarily drumming on those gigs.
Right.
And it wasn't until I got into session work that it got to the point where certain producers didn't even realize I was a drummer, because they had gotten my number as a programmer, and it came up that I play real drums. So like, I forget the first time somebody said, was like, I didn't know you played drums. Like, I was like, yeah, that's how I got into this. So yeah.
What an interesting, like, that's actually a really interesting distinction, and curious that someone would hire someone to program drums that didn't inherently necessarily have drumming skills.
You must remember when you were working with Rick Wake also, there were certain people that were just like the programmer guys.
Right.
And girls. And basically they were mostly keyboard players.
Right.
Who, in addition,
but they didn't really do drums as well. In addition, but I wouldn't necessarily.
Well, they did it as well for basic stuff. If they needed somebody to program like a fake live drum thing to sound like it was a real drummer bebop, then you needed somebody with a drum vocabulary. But I mean, there were people, when I was, with exceptions like Joe Franco and Jimmy Braylauer and Sammy Marandino, were a few of the early session drummers that kind of crossed over to programming, especially Jimmy Braylauer, who became like just a programmer.
Yeah.
It's most of the programmers I saw on like the names I saw on records were people like David Frank or like Prince, who were not primarily drummers.
Right.
And then and like Teddy Riley, and like, who was also an early like programming influence on me. He was, as far as I know, primarily a keyboard player. So there were a lot of people that like the drum programming didn't necessarily have to have like drumistic fills. It just had to have cool sounding fills, or no fills at all. A lot of times a fill wasn't a fill, it was a mute. You know, just like mute going into the chorus. So, and
I guess there's also something to be said for that ignorance that sometimes you come up with something you would never think of, because
I learned so much from Jive. Like, because he really was all instinct. Yeah. And he would like beatbox something and be like, do that. And I would say, sometimes I'd be like, no, that just doesn't work. And other times he would come up with something, and I would think about it, and I'd be like, yeah, even though that is so not a drumistic thing to do, it sounds cool, so why not? So, right. And that was an important lesson for me, to like get out of my own way and just like be open to anything working musically. So,
so how did you, as you started growing in your career, and then you went on tour, what were some of the challenges and the transitions that you had? Because once you start building a flow in one area, whether it be touring or sessions, I mean, you kind of get momentum. How did you balance that?
That's the thing. And like in hindsight, and this can be a later part of the discussion with personal growth, I was kind of on autopilot. Like I was so imbalanced. It was a blessing and a curse to grow up with trauma, because something that I was really doing as a defense and like survival thing, not even realizing I was doing it, was basically, it was really distracting myself, and like leaning hard into music. And if I had been like a more well-balanced person and grown up in a more functional household, I probably would not have like just put everything into music. So something good came out of it, obviously, but I was very stunted as a person. So I was definitely not consciously awake. So I was just going by instinct, and you know, instinct can be a good thing, but if your subconscious is full of garbage, then sometimes your instincts are, you know, you're definitely self-sabotaging. And so I just kind of was like going with the flow, and because I had skills in different areas, and I was versatile enough to play with different types of things, that also worked against me, because if I just stayed in one lane, I'd be like the guy in that lane. And I look back at my friends who have become like the person in that lane, it's because that's all they focused on. And usually it's because that's really the only thing they did really well. So so it's like I did a lot of things well, but I wasn't necessarily like the best rock drummer, I was like a world-class rock drummer, but I have friends that like are like the best, among the best like living rock drummers. Same thing with jazz, same thing with fusion, funk, R&B, reggae, whatever. I can do all that stuff really well, and I can program really well. And but I'd never just like leaned in and stayed in one thing long enough. So as a result, there were times where it felt like I wasn't getting anywhere, because I would do really well in one area and then I would just jump to the next thing. And I wasn't like self-aware enough and seeing the big picture enough to realize I should really just kind of like stay with some momentum in one area. The good thing is though, it's by doing everything I did for long enough, eventually it reached like a tipping point with I'm the guy that does everything. And that's because I had some younger drummers hit me up when it seemed like overnight I was getting like featured in magazines and like in the drum world, because I never even cared about the drum world, because drummers don't hire me. So I had drummer friends that were like pushing hard to be in Modern Drummer and doing drum clinics, and that, not to knock that stuff. I grew up and learned a lot from drum clinics, but I realized at a certain point, like drummers aren't hiring me for shit. Occasionally somebody will ask me to sub on something, but I was just interested in working. So I kind of ignored the drum world. But in the meantime, I remember every once in a while, I would see one of my friends on the cover of Modern Drummer, and I'd be like, wow, I've done some really huge shit. Why isn't the drum world like reaching out to me for that kind of stuff? But it's because I was just jumping from thing to thing. And but eventually I had been on enough different things where
it'd be like, hey, this Wolf guy, we keep seeing him, like,
exactly. And then that kind of snowballed, where I went from like never having been featured in everything to getting like my first magazine covers. And it seemed like, and one of my friends was like, man, how did you make that happen so quickly? I was like, so quickly. I got my first like major label gig in 1989. It took this decades of like doing a lot of everything. So yeah.
Let's go a little bit into that psychology of what was motivating you to not stay in your lane, as it were, like not to, when another opportunity came, were you in a boredom state to go, well, okay, that's nice. Annie Lennox, that's great. Okay. Oh, okay. Well, I played this record. Ooh, okay. Like, what was the motivating factor?
That was all coming from a healthy place, in that, most of these gigs, they weren't retainer gigs. So it would be, I had bills to pay. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when I was working with Grover Washington Jr., that was one of the two at the time in Philly. There were like two like legacy gigs, Patti LaBelle and Grover Washington Jr. And then I think a little later, Boyz II Men. But really, growing up, there were two big artists based out of Philly. And so if I had lived in Philly and was paying Philly rent, I could have just done Grover and then some like other things in between. But like living in New York and getting Philly scale pay,
Right.
And I didn't do the Grover gig for the money. I mean, money was okay, but I did it because I loved Grover's music and loved Grover and loved the band. But yeah, I would be out for however many months, and then I'm living off of that money, but I got to do other shit. And at that point, I knew enough different people, different things. So people would call, and a lot of times I had to say no to things. But if I wasn't on the road, I would just say yes to the next thing that I wanted to do. And what made me stop all that was I realized I really wanted to be doing more session work, because I would get, like I was talking before we went live, I was talking about the first Grammy-winning record I worked on was a Rick Wick / Gary Haas production. Shout out to Gary. Celine Dion. And that was, and I did that gig. I wasn't even the first call because I wasn't like primarily a session musician, but I probably through Billy Mann. I'm guessing Billy told Gary about me. I think it's possible my name came through a few people, but Gary wanted like Steve Ferroni, or one of like the first call New York guys at the time, who wasn't available. It was like I was off the road for a couple weeks, and they were like, "Can you come to Power Station today?" And I just showed up. I didn't know who Celine Dion was, and there was sheet music. It was old school where there was a full rhythm section packing together, and I just forgot about that session. And I charged like single scale. Like I did it. I didn't even ask for cartage at the time. I don't think. I just like showed up with their shit. And then I don't know, like less than a year later, I ran into somebody who were like, "Hey man, congratulations. I saw your name on the Celine Dion record." And I didn't know what they were talking about. And then like it went platinum. It won 2 Grammys, I think. And and then all of a sudden people started calling me more for sessions, and I would miss them because I was on the road. But to get back to your question, I loved playing all different types of music, and I had bills to pay. So, and I loved, and you know, like part of it is the hang. Like, you take certain gigs not just because of the music, but like I love being on the road with these guys, and like I love this crew and whatever. So, I just was going from thing to thing, and I loved doing recording sessions when I got called for them. But really I was doing sessions in between like touring gigs. And then finally I reached a point where I was like, I'm going to have to take a leap of faith and just stop touring and hope that I get enough session work starting to happen. But that's when I also realized that there was the era of like being a full-time session drummer was kind of over. Like you can do it, but like you're going to still have to go out. All my friends that are successful session drummers still do live work.
Right.
Like even Sean Pelton, who's like one of the most successful session guys still in New York, he still has the SNL gig. And when he's not doing SNL, you can catch him playing at the bitter end, or you can catch him like he'll fly to London and play Wembley with Carole King or something. He's always doing live shit.
Does Sean play with Osnoy?
He's played with Oz. Yeah.
I think I saw him play there. I recorded Sean a couple times.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh, insane.
Yeah. And like really great at what he does, and also really carved out a niche for himself early on. And and back to our other point, I remember listening, we both did this couple of the same podcasts, and I would listen to his interview on one, and he was talking about either in high school or college, his teacher had him read Psycho-Cybernetics, which is like one of the old school like personal growth books, and which I didn't read until my 40s. And I was like, man, I wish I had somebody tell me to read that shit when I was like that young. So like, I don't think it's a coincidence that Sean, like his trajectory started so young. But
well, you know, you bring that up. I mean, we've always been really tight and hanging out. Like when we were doing records with, you know, Jive for the most part, that's where we spend most of our time. But we'd always have, and I don't know if you were quite deep into personal development at that point, but
I wasn't.
But you had the intuition of it, because we would just hang out. We would have these deep conversations that were like, I mean, I was always into Tony. A lot of my success is because of that, but and other personal development, and like your natural, like you've always been on the path, whether you realize it or not.
For sure. And it's like, that's a good point. I just wanted to circle back to something that I went off on a tangent. Like, I realized that I couldn't just play drums. I would have to tour, but I didn't want to tour. And also I was dealing with like a lot of like tendonitis and back issues. And so I was like, I'll lean into the programming thing a little harder. But I realized the most working programmers, people didn't want to pay somebody just to come in and do a drum beat. They wanted somebody to program the whole track. So I invested some bread and got my whole sequencing thing together. And I was buying like synth modules and outboard gear. And I don't know if you remember, in my apartment, I had like a Mackie 32 8-bus. I had like a whole
rack full of gear too.
Like multiple 30 space racks. I had a ton of shit. But that is, and back to Jive, like people would pay me to do a remix or to program a full track. And eventually I started kind of carving out that niche of people saying, oh, you do very specialty drum programming and you play drums. And now to the point where people will have me come in and do both, because that's kind of the modern approach.
When you went to Berkeley or prior, did you also have could you play piano or guitar, or did you have any other?
My father played piano, and so there was always a piano and like an organ in the house I could fuck around on. And I took my senior year of high school, I took music theory, taught me everything I needed to know. I was already playing by ear though, because when I was playing in bands, we would rehearse in my parents' attic, and people would leave their guitars and basses there. So I figured out bar chords, and I didn't know what a root and a fifth is. I could just kind of hear, you just hear your way through shit and you figure things out. And you start to notice relationships between the strings. And then, but then taking music theory, just learning the names of intervals was everything I needed to know. And then at Berkeley, I took some ear training, which was also a really good thing, like advanced ear training, which was a really good thing for me. But yeah, it's like, I am definitely not a keyboard or guitar virtuoso, but the beauty of Pro Tools is I can edit it to make it sound like I know what I'm doing more than I do. I mean, I have good ears, and I can arrange parts, and if I'm sequencing, I can pretty much do anything. Like, I listened back to some of the tracks I was programming in the 90s and early 2000s. It's like, yeah, I sound like a really solid keyboard player, but I'm not. I suck. So,
but awareness is the first step to transformation.
Yes.
So as you were, doing that, and then, you shared when Sean turned you on to, or let you know, you mentioned about psycho-cybernetics.
Yeah.
The personal drives a professional is my belief, and it doesn't matter what your professional is.
Yeah.
How did you start incorporating like that holistic approach to just life to also be more healthy and more grounded? And did that affect your performance, your writing, your producing as you became more self-aware and growth?
Yeah. Well, I want to backpedal. When I was at Berkeley, I blew my hands out. It was a very friendly but competitive atmosphere. And if you weren't like playing 16 hours a day, like you weren't serious, like that was not necessarily the healthiest vibe, but I would be, and this is before they kept backline kits in all the practice rooms. So drummers, we were lugging our entire kit up and down steps to set it up for the next ensemble or the next rehearsal or the next gig at night. And I was lugging a full kit. Eventually, I got smarter and just started doing kick, snare, hat, because I saw Zach Alford, who's a pretty successful drummer. I don't know. Did you ever work with Zach?
Mm-mm.
Anyway, heavy resume. And he was already like the cat. He was successful just in Boston, and then he got his first gig, and then his career really blew up. But Zach, I remember walking by an ensemble room, and I heard like some of the deepest pocket drumming I'd heard. And I looked in, and it was just a guy with a kick snare, a hat, and like a broken cymbal. And I was like, the next day I stopped lugging around a full kit. So, but yeah, you're lugging your kid around and then you're doing a gig at night. I would get back to the dorm rooms and I could barely feel my hands, but I would wake up the next day fully restored. And then one day, I think when my growth spurt stopped, because I was a late bloomer, like your body changes and it doesn't repair itself the same way. And I woke up one day and I could barely move my hands. My back was like locked up. And I went to like a Western doctor, a sports doctor, and they're like, yeah, you're done with drumming. And a friend of mine who is now a very famous guitar player, at the time, he was like, man, fuck that. Like I'm going to give you the number of a guy, go see him. It's going to sound really crazy to you with what you grew up in, but like, go see this guy. And I went to see this guy named Richard Zukowski, who sadly I found out just passed last week, but
sorry. He
treated a lot of now famous musicians who were in Boston at that time. And he helped me become aware of like what I put into my body. So my physical health started, like, I don't know if you remember, I was always eating really healthy. Yeah. So he was the guy that was like, what do you eat? And I was like, what does my diet have to do with like my hands? And he's like, everything. And he was like, you got to cut out sugar, red meat, anything processed, dairy, which was pretty much all I ate. So he taught me to like really think about nutrition and what I put in my body. And he taught me about stretching and the importance of the ergonomic relationship with a drum set and my body. I'm like a dancer basically, or an athlete. You got to take better care. And so that made a huge difference for me. But I wish somebody had also said, you know, but your thoughts also, like your mental health, you can't just like take care of your physical health. I mean, the way I see it now is mental and physical, it's all like one thing. So yeah. But yeah, I wish somebody had just explained neuroscience to me and said there's a reason why you have chronic inflammation and like the role of stress and depression and all that shit can play on your body. So that took me another like 20 years to figure out. So for a long time, I was like eating the right things and my health did get better and it helped me age better. But it wasn't until like I hit an emotional bottom. Like I had to hit a physical bottom to kind of like learn to take care of my body. It wasn't until I hit like a psychological or emotional bottom in my late 30s that I finally like started with like my wife at the time had been begging me to get therapy and I wouldn't hear of it. And she would suggest books now that I live by, but I didn't want to read any of those books. And we've talked about these books before. Yeah. And but yeah, it wasn't until like I really hit the wall hard that but it started with a physical illness. I had pneumonia that would not go away no matter what. And I tried Western medicine. I tried like really powerful antibiotics. I tried acupuncture and herbs and it wouldn't go away. And so I remembered like reading somewhere that in Asian medicine, different parts of the body or organs correspond to different emotions. And I remember hearing the lungs were associated with grief. And I was like, all right, nothing else is working. This is like, I've had pneumonia for 6 months. Let me look into this. And that was, you know, that was the beginning of me really, once I got into therapy, feeling how the effect it had on my physical health and then long-term emotional health. And that led me to really kind of treat personal growth the way I had learning how to play drums. Like it's not just reading, it's not just therapy. It's like a daily practice. Yeah. It's like another person who sadly passed away of COVID actually was the therapist that I was with the longest, a guy named Ricardo Castaneda, who he didn't really have a one-size-fits-all approach. The guy was a psychiatrist, a neurologist, and a psychopharmacologist. And wow. He was pretty funny because he would always say, like, I can't tell you who this is, but I have a page. He's like, you know they are. Because his client list was a lot of like presidents and like wow. Almost like Tony, like, but not as many like that. But still, like, if anytime you're in his waiting room, you might see like an A-list singer or actor or actress or politician. Right. But his practice was not that. It was just, he would treat anybody that needed help. And he just loved helping people, but the more curious, he was also curious. So if you had some shit that he never dealt with, he was really, really down to help, and he would find a way to kind of speak your language. So for me, he related everything to music, and talking about, like, he said, when you first sat down at a drum set, you couldn't fathom 4-way independence. And he said, but eventually you got to the point where not only could you do 4-way independence, you could be like talking to your drum tech on stage in front of 20,000 people, telling them to like what you need in your monitor mix, and not even paying attention to what your body's doing while you're listening to the rest of the band. It's all happening. Yeah. And he said, your mind is an instrument, and you only know like 2 notes on it. And you've been living your life thinking that that's the full range of your mind. And you really need to learn how to make it resonate, and like pull all the duct tape off the drum, like the drum head of your, like, let your brain resonate. And he was into all that stuff, but he was also into like Buddhist philosophy. And so there was a lot of neuroscience there. There were Buddhist practices, and there were just like the regular Freudian, Jungian psychoanalysis. But and so in that terms, I do think of it as a daily practice.
Right.
So,
dude, that analogy is brilliant. I love it.
It was great. That really kind of helped me a lot, because he wasn't the first therapist I went to, and the first therapist I went to helped me process, just kind of really let a lot of the ice melt of my emotional armor, so I could at least kind of even feel things that I had like repressed for so long. But this guy really, he was more of like a scientific approach that really helped me figure a lot of shit out. And yeah, almost like a personal mental trainer. So,
right. Well, yeah. And I mean, that's what coaches are, right? So you had basically a therapist that was a coach, really, that was able to bring in.
Yeah, but the thing is, he didn't want to talk about day-to-day shit, like coaching, we never talked about like, what are you doing with your life? He was just more like helping, but I get
the coaching style, meaning like to help you access your tools.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Right. And that's all. I mean, that's kind of coaching, that I do, and how he does. It's helping you access your tools. It's not the only day-to-day conversation is a reference to what they want to change. So
exactly. Yeah. Theory, so and that I wanted to change the state of my mental health. Yeah.
Now, what's interesting is, and I'm sure you've experienced this with some quote crazy artists or eccentric artists, that they don't want to heal because their fear is their motivation will go away. I don't know if that makes sense. And I won't name the artist, but this one, like bipolar, neurotic, needed definitely something, I believe pharmaceutical at least, to help them gain some sort of normalcy to be able to figure out how they can manage their own state. And they did not want to get any help for fear that it would take away their talent. Oh, you're free.
Yeah. Oh, there you are.
Here you go. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm going to hang up now.
Let me go to put this back.
Yeah. So you were just getting into something, artists who don't want to heal, I think you were saying.
Right. And so I dealt with one, they'll remain nameless, that they would not get the help they could benefit from, that they need, for fear that they wouldn't be able to perform the same way. They would lose their edge, their skills, their creativity, and so forth.
I had that conversation with my shrink when I started to really get over the hump. I remember, because I had a few things going on, but like the reason I reached out was mostly for depression, because I had been living with, the clinical term is dysthymia since I was like 2 years old or something, which is just basically, it's not a full-on clinical depression. It's like melancholy and just kind of down. But on top of that, I was very withdrawn, and I always knew something was off, but it was never bad enough for me to do anything about it. And like I said, it was when I was married and not on the road, because all my relationships before that, I was never around often enough to be interfacing that often with somebody that could call me out on that. So it was, my wife at the time was now a therapist, actually. But she was like, you really need to deal with this shit. And I was very stubborn about it. And, but I mostly went to start with just to deal with the depression. I remember it was kind of like, and there was a lot more to it, because depression grew out of like PTSD basically. And so there was a lot to deal with. But I remember feeling like it was like the ice was kind of starting to melt and like a little bit of like light would come through. And I remember like just, it would be like less than a minute, but I would all of a sudden feel like a different chemical state, like I was in a different body for like a minute. And I was like, this is what not being depressed feels like. And then it would go back to depression. And then those little moments of like light getting through would happen more frequently and last longer until there was a real shift to where my baseline was, I was okay. I wasn't jumping for joy, but I was probably like at a 0. But when you're used to living well below 0,
right,
being 0 feels amazing, feels like a 10. So I remember it switched. And then when that happened, every once in a while, then I would have a depressive episode. And they would last long, like days. And then eventually they would last hours and eventually minutes. And then they just stopped. And I remember when I got to that point, when it was still in the shift but I was starting to feel what it feels like to not be depressed. And I also did this without meds. And he was a psychopharmacologist, and he even at one point suggested a short-term course of antidepressants. He said, just so your brain can get a snapshot of what it feels like to not be so imbalanced. And I just wasn't down to do it. And he said, that's fine. You don't need to do it. You can shift your chemicals naturally over time, but like you're gonna have to come more often. And he lowered his rates so I could come more often. Really good guy. But I remember when I felt the shift, and I started to really feel it. And I had this like a little bit, not a full on freak out, but I was like, I started looking at myself and saying, who am I? Like so much of my persona was built off of being like a doom and gloom person. Or actually, I was always kind of optimistic, but I still just, my world felt like just,
I know what you mean. Yeah.
And I was like, if I'm not, like, do I want to do music? Like, did I really want all these tattoos? Was everything I did in my life a reaction to feeling the way I felt? And I remember I brought that up to him at a therapy session, and he laughed, and he said, this is very common. I treat a lot of artists, and this is one of those times he's like, I can't tell you who, but he's a really the most famous like horror movie writer. And I'm thinking like, is he talking about Stephen King? Who's he talking about? And he's like, I can't tell you who it is, but I've been treating this guy for years. And when he got over like lifelong depression, he was like, am I going to be able to make a living anymore? Like, can I still write dark movies?
Right.
Or direct? I don't know if it's a writer or director, but, and I was like, so what's the answer? And he said, who cares? The answer is, are you happy? Who gives a fuck? He said, you got to be open to like, just be open to spontaneity and like with the unknown, and just like, because the whole thing, like the whole, like, man can never step in the same river twice. He would always drop these analogies, but he said, yeah, like so much of your life was reactionary, and like, but none of it was like, just be spontaneous, live a creative life. Don't live like a defensive life. Just be creative, see what's happening. And he said, probably you're still going to do music and you're still going to be you. You'll just be a happier version of you. So, and he was right. So,
yeah. Well, and that's the reason why I asked is I think a lot of people, they attach their identity to that
dark
whatever. And then if they lose that, like, that's part of me. And there's actually a grieving process to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just so powerful that you're able to continue to push through and stay present, because you're still Wolf. You're still awesome. You're still all of that. Now you just have more access to more of who you are.
Yeah.
Which actually ultimately, so then my question then comes, did you notice a shift in your playing, in your production, in your writing?
You asked me about that before. Sorry.
Yeah. No. Well, it was a two-phase question.
Yes and no. I think becoming more present, and it's also a lot of things are like mixed blessing and a curse, or a double-edged sword. Like all the chronic inflammation forced me to simplify my playing. But at the time, and I fought that. I had an internal like subconscious battle with that for years, judging myself. Because the truth is now I can't stand drummers who overplay, even though I was an overplayer for a long time. But I I couldn't let go of, like, I couldn't get over the fact that I went from somebody who could play like Michael Jordan-esque level drums, just like, you know, super drumming, to somebody who I could still pull out some moves, but most of the higher level work I do, it's about less is more.
Right.
But I was still had a part of myself that was still judging and fighting and just couldn't make peace with like being somebody who's a different guy. It's like, okay, you were that guy, now you're not, and who cares, because you don't even like that aesthetic musically anymore. But between that and like being forced to make a change and also becoming more present, like I started thinking less in terms, and this also happened just naturally through doing production and programming, where I started seeing the big picture. I stopped thinking in terms of what would be a cool drum part, but like what serves the song best. And so a big part of that is being more present and like not being stuck in my head as much. And that being said, I was a pretty present musician, and even when I was overplaying, I was still trying to
tastefully doing it.
Yeah, but maybe like 90% of me was present and 10% of me was like, okay, I gotta impress the other drummers listening to this record, so I need to throw some. Now, like, that's gone. Right. It's just what serves the song. And yeah, and I don't have as much baggage, so I think any decision I make, whether it's musical or otherwise, is coming from a healthier, like, present place. So, and then as far as my career, because it's not that I'm more successful, it's that I can stay out of my own way. And like, I used to have this thing about self-promotion and money, you know, like all these things that, like, I mean, I've always been financially stable, but I grew up without, and this is, again, not until I got into like examining myself did I become aware of this, but I grew up with like this narrative that money is bad. And I also had this narrative, but I also had this narrative that it's not good to not be financially stable, because I had a parent that was horrible with money. So,
well, that's a pickle.
Yeah, so it was like I always, so I created this narrative where I'm always going to be okay, but I'm not going to be like better okay. I've lived well. So, but like I have two brothers that like they make a lot more money than me. At least I assume they do, just based, we've never talked about it, but, and I have friends, you know, like people that you know too in music that are like multimillionaires and billionaires. And it's like, they didn't have any kind of like subconscious self-limiting narrative, like blocking them from, you know, and it's never just one thing. It's like any type of thing you do, you can connect the dots to the decision or the conversation that blocked you from manifesting whatever it is. So, so I've been learning more and more. And the thing is, I never got into music to be rich. I just was like, I want to do what I love and be comfortable, which I've been very fortunate to be living that for, you know, since I was basically a teenager. So, and it's like, so not that I don't want to be rich now, but I'm open to it. Like, but it's still like, I don't care, but at least there's nothing blocking me from if I ever want to. And the truth is you're never going to get rich as a sideman. Like, I mean, you can make a lot of money, but it's like, that's the part of me that doesn't have that thing. Oh, I have to make all my money as a drummer. Like, I've let go of that. Like, I'm fine if I want to make more income doing something else. So, there's that. And then also the self-promotion thing. It's too long to get into, but for some shit that I grew up around, I had this thing about like, you don't want to self-promote, and you kind of want to do good work, but stay hidden. So like, I was subconsciously kind of keeping myself in the shadows while consciously thinking like, why am I not more in the spotlight? So I was definitely working against myself. So that was a huge shift. I just kind of like stopped blocking myself in those two areas.
Interesting. And at the same time?
Slowly, yeah, because in the last few years, I have had money come in that wasn't coming from drumming, and it was good money. And it's like, I don't care if it wasn't from drumming. I mean, I'm still doing music full time, but it was just, I have a skill set in other areas that somebody offered me money, and I took it. So, and I do
other areas, meaning not music related, or just not as a drummer?
Oh, no, not music.
Okay.
Because a lot of my once I stopped touring, a lot of my music money is not playing drums, it's programming, it's producing, it's mixing. And that, some of my biggest paychecks have been just publishing from co-writes. So, but no, just completely not music. But it's basically a skill set I developed from therapy, and like, you know, so it's basically a form of coaching, and we can talk about this later. But yeah, so it's around the same time. Yeah, I kind of like let go of my like the need to, like, my identity is I'm a drummer, I'm a musician, and that, and also at the same time letting go of the narrative that, like, I should be comfortable, but I shouldn't have too much extra money. And now I'm like, I don't care. Like, I'm open to
you don't care in a good way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and then also, like, that whole thing about keeping myself in the shadows while working, like, I let go of that. So,
well, and it's really powerful, because I think a lot of times that's where, quite honestly, one of my struggles growing, like, through the industry is, I would see some people self-promoting, and you know, the first thing, we'd be at a party and they'd be like, hey, talk, you know, like, me, and let me tell you more about me. And now that I'm done talking about me, what do you know about me? And I was just like, oh my gosh, I hate that, like that. So going out and getting gigs and all that, I'd be, you know, kind of like you in that, well, my work is going to speak for itself. You know, like, you know, that record, I did that. So, you know, that's me. And then I went and, you know, I got a manager because I wanted someone else to do my promoting. But we live in a day now where it's not that, you know, we all have to be self-promoters.
Well, social media, I mean, for music, well, every business, but really for music, it's just changed the game completely, where it's like, I don't have a choice. I got on Instagram originally just because I had to see certain content, but I never, like, the first couple of years I was on there, I didn't post. I posted like once a year. And I've had to, like, kind of get more comfortable with posting more often. And I'm still, like, I'll make a draft and I'm like, okay, I got to post something about this record this week. But every time I'm about to post, I'm like, there's still that resistance. And I'll be like, that's always like, fuck it, I'll post it. And that's, with practice, that's getting easier to just put shit out there. So, but yeah, there's still part of me, it's finding that balance, because you don't want to be that person that's just like, me, check me out. But you also don't want to be the person that's like, yeah, my work speaks for itself. Like,
no, because if no one will see it. I mean, it's funny, I'll share a quick thing. When I was leaving, working with Tony, he was like, look, dude, because you're not a coach, you're not a speaker, you're not a trainer, you're not an author. You are a marketer of your speaking, coaching, training, books. And, you know, another word for marketing is promotion. And that is such a struggle sometimes, especially for people who are like giving, caring, empathetic people, to come from a place of like, oh yeah, you know, let's talk. I mean, most of this show, you know, is to celebrate other people, to help other people. But I also know that if I don't promote it, no one's going to see it.
Exactly.
No one's going to listen. No one's going to get the benefit of the wisdom you're sharing right now if no one knows about it.
Yeah. 100%.
Crazy world we live in, like, just our minds. So let's get into like some timing on now. So COVID hit. What were you doing?
I'm listening, but I'm getting more water. But
okay, so the question will be, when you return, is how did you deal with or what was happening when COVID was, you know, when the lockdowns and all that crazy stuff, you know, to put a timestamp on this conversation, because for me and many of the people in the speaking world, which is very similar to the entertainment world, where there's gigs and there's reasons for people to get together and seminars and all of that. Did you have events, gigs, productions, tours, anything coming up that got abruptly curtailed?
Yes and no, because I do so much remote work. And the thing is, the music, a lot of people that didn't have like remote recording abilities are now, out of necessity, getting that together.
Right.
But I was always doing a lot of that. And so that didn't change. But what did change is a lot of projects that I knew were on the horizon. A lot of people pay, especially indie artists now, and with the paradigm shift with how music is like packaged and sold. I mean, it's virtual packaging for the most part now.
Right.
You can be an indie artist and compete with major label artists. You're seeing more and more of that. So a lot of indie artists, they support themselves and their recording budgets through gigs. And so that's stopped. So the majority, except for certain wealthy recording artists, or then we've all done vanity projects. You know what I mean? Like those things can still happen if like there's family money involved, whatever. But in general, like most recording work just stopped. And because I wasn't really doing live, I would do occasionally like local live things in LA or New York with friends, but I haven't been like a live drummer, or except for Osnoy, we talked about him. Like, yeah. And I only did those gigs with Oz because he was like, this is how we do pre-production for my record. We basically rehearse the material at the bitter end every week.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And the bitter end's like 5 minutes from my house.
Yeah.
Not a problem. So, but yeah, so the live work thing didn't affect me, but everything else slowed down, shut down. And then there was one project which I actually had to sign an NDA I can't talk about, but that was supposed to be a really cool thing, potentially very lucrative. And that was going to start in the summer. It got pushed back to the fall, and now it's clearly not happening in the fall. So I don't know when it's happening, but so yeah, my definitely like all of the work I do shifted, or not just shifted, it almost all of it just stopped. And then what little there is, and I did like a print interview recently about like checking with different drummers during the quarantine. And I said like I'm doing a lot of like work now that's just purely for collaborative reasons, because a lot of friends that are normally everybody's busy doing other shit and busy making money. We all have time, and then friends of mine that are, normally on the road and never had a home recording rig, they're now doing home recording rigs, and it's like, hey, let's just do some shit, send some shit back and forth.
Right.
Or they're indie artists that want me to work on something, and I just know they don't have the money right now. So I haven't worked on spec in years, but it's like now it's like, yeah, I'll do some shit on spec, and and that's another thing. Like I've never been on unemployment before, and then when this happened, I didn't even think I could get unemployment because I was not getting a paycheck from any one place. And then a bunch of my music friends were like, dude, get on it. There's the pandemic assistance, the Fed money, just get it. And I signed up for it, and it was like, oh, this is cool. This is definitely helping in the meantime.
Right.
And then and I hope they extend it. And I know they're still negotiating to extend it, but they're not just the music industry, the event industry. There's so many industries where like people are just out of work indefinitely. So,
so for some of your, and I haven't gotten a chance to, and maybe you can hook me up to, because I spoke to D and stuff, but I'm so far out removed from the industry that it's only the old, the OGs that I'm still, contacted with. But I'd love to, and maybe you could have some insight and maybe a referral or something. The younger artists now that so much of their psycho remuneration, where like the purpose they did it was for the playing live and getting the adoration and all that, like what are they doing now to create that energy? Because that's something that's a loss, that is also not a complete loss, because there's hope, but when? Like so much uncertainty.
There's hope, but there's also the social media thing. You know what I mean? Like I have friends that are in bands that people are doing their COVID bubbles, like people that they can be around without masks, without socially distancing. And I'm seeing that with certain artists that I've worked with, that they are doing like streaming events from a friend of mine. I think she's doing something today. No, it's actually, I think she's going to be hosting it today, but they actually filmed something. Remember Euphoria Rehearsal Studios in New York? Yeah. It's an artist I work with, Drea, and Osnoy played on it, and Ray Angry she usually uses a full band, but she just used those two guys. And I talked to her right before that. She was like, yeah, we're going to go to Euphoria. Euphoria is set up. It's like super sanitized, and And I was like, what about masks? And she's like, well, Ray and I have already had COVID. We're not wearing masks. And we're far enough apart, but she was like, yeah, Oz might wear a mask. But even like, there's that. And then other people that are just every day going live. And I think they just do that so they can still get some of that. It's not the same thing as performing in front of an audience, but if you have, if you have that like feedback, even if it's just like lines of
right. Yeah. A couple of comments or likes. Yeah.
Yeah. Or one of the records that just came out, that Billy Mann produced, it just came out and the guy's getting a shitload of press, and he's a big artist, and he's another like example of somebody you don't need to make. He was signed to Interscope, but he got signed to Interscope, and I could be getting some of this wrong, but he was a YouTube sensation with like hundreds of millions of views.
Wow, yeah.
And very talented. I believe Billy is also his manager. I think I could be getting it wrong, but this kid Alex Iono, insanely talented, and plays a bunch of instruments, sings really well, writes, produces his own shit, and he's very self-contained, and he makes good video content himself too, and also a good-looking guy. He's like really like a marketer's dream for like a young pop artist,
right?
And so I think they got out of the Interscope deal because it's like, what do you need a label for when the label is like giving you such a shitty deal?
Right.
It's the only business model where like the marketing company takes like 85% of it's so. And then not only that, like they're making these judgment calls to say, well, we're going to spend this on this, and we're going to do this, and also this is your money, because until we recoup this, you're not going to see it.
Right.
So, and it's like,
so wait, I don't get a say in any of this? Can I look at the budget? I'm like, nope.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the thing. It's like, well, this kid already was reaching more people than your marketing department's reaching on his own on YouTube. So what does he need you for? So anyway, that turned into like a huge international following where he can tour the world every year and sell out shows because he just has this organic grassroots fan base. And so when we were recording the record, it was December, and I had just gotten over a horrible respiratory thing, which I'm pretty sure was an early version of COVID before we knew that it was COVID. And I remember they were talking about how he's going to tour the record because it's a very unique record, the way the production approach with the instrumentation. And yeah, right now he's getting like a lot of love in the press, really great reviews, online stuff, it's in print, and normally he'd be out on the road promoting it. And he can't do that now. So he's on Instagram Live all the time and with huge numbers. And I think that's to go back to your question. I think that's what a lot of artists are doing. It helps you stay engaged with your audience, and
right.
What did you say? Remuneration, I think.
Psycho remuneration. So like, yeah, they're just.
It makes what you get. A good term. Good. I will add to my vocabulary. So, but yeah, I think there's that, and I think it's also just for marketing purposes. Like, you have a new record out, you want your fans to know about it and hear it, and you want to expose new people to it. And so, yeah, you're just, since you can't be out playing clubs, and I guess he can do some TV, just streaming from wherever, but. Yeah, it's just like I'm sure he wasn't planning on this. He was going to do the promotional tour,
right.
from his living room. So, and it's a lot of artists are dealing with the same thing. So, yeah, I think social media, that's one of those areas where that does fill some of that gap.
Right. And unfortunately, it doesn't fill the rest of the infrastructure, all the basically the people who put the tour together. There's all the other tour managers, the crew, it feels so horrible for everyone.
Yeah, the traveling crew, and then the local crew, and the local support of the venues themselves, the concessions at the venues, and yeah, it's just like an endless list of industry.
Actually, you mentioned Sean and SNL. I haven't really. It's been years actually since I actually paid attention to SNL, just for getting old, not staying up late. Are they like? Is that banned? And are they still like? Are they doing something?
I think from what I remembered, like the last and I know Seth Meyers' band is doing it this way. They're doing it from home and sending all their shit in, and then whoever was the person in the control room that was like blending all the camera feeds and mixing sound is now just doing that virtually.
Okay.
So the sad thing is the entire crew is not working, because those shows have makeup artists, hair, makeup. There's the caterers at NBC or whatever network. There are the pages at the show. There's the carpenters, the set builders, the painters, and the drivers getting the talent back and forth. The hotels that are putting the guest artists up and the hosts up. And but from what I remember, I think the SNL band they just had them all play remotely play the theme song.
Okay.
And,
now, is technology caught up yet that they can do it live together?
I don't think it's in real time. I could be wrong. And I actually want to ask, because the Seth Meyers show, which they have the guest drummer thing, which I did a couple of years ago.
Yep.
So for a while, because Seth Meyers is basically, I think they might be back in the studio. I'm not sure. But for the most part, I think Seth Meyers is filming from home. The interviews are like Zoom interviews. Yeah. And then, the musical guests can do their thing from wherever, and Fred Armisen was just back as the house drummer, and they were all doing their shit separately, but I don't think it was in real time. But I want to ask, because they went back to the guest drummer thing, and a friend of mine, Nikki, was, I think, their first guest drummer back, and I've actually been meaning to hit her up and ask her, because I saw that she was doing it from her home, but I wanted to ask. You have
your kit all ready to go, set up at yours?
I don't have a drum set here. I'm at my girl's place in LA. So basically, I've been bi-coastal for a while, and but since things got serious with my girlfriend, the place I usually stay, which is my friend Luke's place in Hollywood, I got my stuff from there, and so I have a programming rig here at my girl's place. So basically, when we're in New York, we live at my place. You know my place on 12th Street, and then here I'm at her place. And I can't play drums in the apartment. I am going to get a V-drum set. I didn't get one because I have a V-drum kit in my place in New York, but I didn't think that. I kind of thought we'd be like past the quarantine phase by now. But
I know I think everyone thought that. Yeah. Like, oh, this can't be more than 3 months.
Yeah. So it's like I have a practice pad in 6 here, and I talked to a studio that I've worked at out here before, and I said, when it gets to the point where budgets start opening up, where I can book time to track drums, I'll usually do that in New York at a place called Mission Sound in Williamsburg. You ever work at Mission? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'll work with Oliver at Mission. That's like my second home in New York. And then here, there's a place, Ultimate Studios, where it's just like Mission. That the owner and engineer is a drummer, has a great drum collection, and so and so it's like, at a certain point, I'll be able to go there and play drums there. But I need something here, because this is the longest I've gone without playing drums on a regular basis. So, do
you play air drums? I know, like, hanging out with Joe Franco, like, even when we're sitting there having lunch, he'd be just sitting there air playing and like hitting his legs and just, is that, I never noticed you doing that.
Yeah, no, I don't need it the same way. And honestly, when I started taking breaks from drumming, like a week off the kit, it's good for me, and it goes back to the whole being present and not relying on a bag of tricks, and just like what is going to make the most sense for the music I'm playing right now.
Right.
But it's been months, so and I have gotten calls to play live drums on stuff, but again, budgets are so much lower now that it's like there's enough money for me to make any money and pay the studio to book the studio for a few hours. Yeah. So for that stuff, I'll refer it to like, do you remember Nir, the Israeli drummer? Nir. Yeah. So Nir is in Nashville. He's got an amazing home studio. So he and the producer, one of the producers that called me for live drums, he works with Nir too. And I was like, dude, I have no drums here. And he's like, all right, I'll call Nir. And because it was a record we were working on already where I was programming, but they wanted one live track. And he's like, can you do it? I was like, I can program a fake live track, but if you want like real live drums, call Nir. And so yeah, over the years, when stuff would come to me that it wasn't enough to cover my time and the studio, I would always like refer to like Near or like Brian Tishy or a number of other guys that I know have really great home like studio sounds.
Well, and one of the things I just want to notice and I want to acknowledge you for is, whether you realize it or not, everything that you've done has prepared you for an issue, right? Like you didn't realize getting in and doing the programming so early, but the fact that you were willing to do that when things got a little bit weird, you were way ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, for sure.
And same thing with the studio now, having all that, and like everything that you've done, it's like you've, other than consciously, had an awareness of what would serve you the best.
Yeah, no, definitely the remote recording, and you helped prepare me for remote recording, because like you were more than anybody else, and I definitely relied, and I owe a debt of gratitude to a number of engineers, but you were my go-to. And it would only be if it was like 5 a.m. or something, and I knew I couldn't call you. I'd be like, okay, who do I know in LA? All right now.
Who's just going to bed?
Yeah. So, but yeah, no, you helped prepare me for that. Like remote recording, I got into it really early on, and now that's the new normal. And I'm definitely going to curve with that. So.
Well, I remember when the studios started closing, when Dream Factory closed, when, you know, even all the bigger studios in the city were closing, what we were doing, you know, I had a studio in my house, and I think I think I mixed everything. We actually didn't, it wasn't quite that bad yet where we had to do it at, you know, everything at home. But for a while, the kind of the end of my doing music all the time was we would go into Cove or Pi or Power Station or whatever, and just bang out a drum track and a bass, and, you know, see what we could get in the basics, whatever we could keep. Then go to each person would go home. Like, all right, I'm going to add those guitar tracks. I'm going to add the vocals. and we did it all separately. And then I ended up, you know, I would mix it in my house. I had a studio in my house as well. Yeah. And that's been going on for a long time.
And most of the biggest mixers that I know in the pop world have their own setup, and a lot of them are mixing in the box, like 100% box. So it's but yeah, the producers that I've worked with the most were also doing a lot of shit on their own, like too many. I don't want to start dropping names now, but like a lot of the guys I know that are still in an era where it's getting more and more difficult to make a living if you're not the flavor of the month. But if you have a certain skill set together and enough of like a track record, you could still be relevant and still be working. And my friends that are doing that, who are all names, who have, you know, at one time maybe been like the guy, and now, but they're still like not the flavor of the month now, they're still cranking work out, and it's because they all got the home studio thing together.
Yep. And granted, those home studios are probably pretty significant.
Yes, well, some more than others. I mean, I have to say, like, talking, like we were talking, I mentioned my friend Luke before, Dr. Luke. Yeah. He, for his first run of like back-to-back #1 hits, he was doing it all in his basement studio on 21st Street in New York, and not like, you know,
I worked at that. I think I worked at that.
You probably have. You've probably been there. Yeah. And the thing is, I was doing programming for that stuff on my Digital 1, like, I think that's when I had 32 tracks of Pro Tools, because I had like the expansion. But and this was also because I refused to get a newer Pro Tools rig. After Pro Tools 5, the MIDI beat clock wasn't as consistent or something like that. And I remember for whatever reason I was like, I'm not switching. So I was like using a really antiquated version of Pro Tools on a really antiquated rig with like what would be like an audiophile would say I had a crappy gear, but it's like I'm hearing this shit on the radio right now. So fuck it, working. But that being said, to your point, yeah, my friends, I'm thinking of, did you ever work with Yaron? Mm-hmm. He's like, so I want to say it's in Westchester, but it's, you know, it's out of the city. His home studio, and he's like a spokesperson for Avid, and they just did like a Zoom thing where he was, I think it was Yaron, his assistant Spencer, and Michael Brower, another like big name mixer. Like his home studio is easily as good as any like state of the art studio anywhere. So, but
well, and it's so funny how technology, we experienced, I know it's a word that is overused, disruptor, you know, like Uber disrupted the taxis and Airbnb disrupted the hotels. Man, Pro Tools and Digital Performer and all of those, that disrupted the music industry like nothing ever. Like we didn't even have a word for it except for what the F.
Yeah, it definitely did. And because you probably were trained to work with tape, just like my first recording.
Yeah, I was cutting tape originally. Yeah,
that's all that. I can't remember the last time I did a session of tape.
Well, you know, it's funny. I had Richie Kanata on like 2 weeks ago, and one of the things that they're promoting at Cove is he's got tape. And he's like, hey, come and like experience. It's almost like going on like the cruise. Like, it's on tape, really? You know, it's a cool thing because I think for some that's like, wow, that was the way you did it.
Yeah, it's a novelty, and I get it. And I think the last tape session I did was because there was an artist who was obsessed with like a certain era of like Led Zeppelin, and he was like, all right, I got to find a room that has, I don't know if it was APIs or whatever. He was like, the board has to be this, it's got to be tape, and I need to use these amps, these mics, these drums. And he was like, yeah, that's what I want. So we did it. But that was probably over 10 years ago. So
yeah, but it also brings me to like further down, if I recall, after all that happened, and then record companies started closing. I was with our management was part with Brian Doyle and those guys with Hall & Oates, and they were like, Hall & Oates, the first million that each of them made was on the only record they ever made from record sales was the record they sold the least of on their own label. Like they were like, well, what am I doing? Why are we doing this? And then same thing with Hanson. They were like, dude, we sell like, tiny amounts comparatively, but we make more money than
ourselves.
Yeah. And what you shared earlier, I remember some bands that they got to a certain point, you're talking about this new artist, they got to a certain point on their own, making great money, touring fantastically. They get signed to a major label. And all then, they just, because the label couldn't get them to where they were. And then they couldn't take them to the next level.
Yeah, I'm kind of biting the hand that feeds me, but like when all the shift started happening and I saw labels had to consolidate and budgets started dropping, it was definitely affecting my like income negatively, but I was happy because I just watched. I always thought like just the basic structure of like a record deal was bullshit. And just watching over the years, like how artists are treated by labels. And look, when people went and bought physical product, there was so much money.
Everybody was happy.
The pie was so huge that even if you got like this bullshit, like unfair, tiny amount of the pie, you were living large.
Yep.
But it was never a fair deal. And so yeah, I was kind of happy to see. And then when they shifted to CDs, and then they started charging more for CDs, which were way less expensive to manufacture. They still have the R&D clause in the contract where they would take more from artists because you're paying part of we need to recoup R&D into this new technology, which was
right.
Long past. There were all these like ways they were just robbing people, and it was just harder and harder. And then it was like, the early pioneers of like record company owners in the suits were people that were passionate about music. And then all of a sudden, decades later, it's people that graduated with a degree in music business, whatever. And so they're thinking in terms of products and what's called a widget or whatever. It was like, it's no longer just about like developing an artist. A lot of artists that are now like titans and icons, their first 3 records like tanks, but or it's like Seinfeld, like the first couple seasons, they needed somebody to believe in them and keep developing it. And then all of a sudden I started seeing you could be an artist that like the labels are like bidding for you. They tell you that you're everything if your first record doesn't deliver, or if the A&R person that was in your corner like leaves, all of a sudden they're like, oh, you're a tax write-off later for you.
Right.
And and they were so I was still going and buying a lot of music, partially because I love music and partially because I always need to stay current, especially as a programmer, because that's where the sounds are constantly changing. So there used to be a Virgin Megastore. I would go there and I would drop at least $100 a week on CDs. And I can't tell you how many times I was so pissed off because I would drop like $20 on a CD from an artist because I really wanted to cop like the vibe, the production on this one song. It turns out the song that I'd heard on the radio was a remix, and on the record, and the rest of the record was filler because at that point the labels were all about singles. We need the single, and so I was like, man, they're charging consumers way too much. They're ripping off the artists and they're putting out bullshit. So
now you wonder why people started stealing it.
Exactly. And that's the thing. Like, people were complaining about Napster. I was like, fuck it. The labels brought this upon themselves, and eventually the technology will like find its way. And it's been happening. And yeah, I think company like Spotify's and Apple Music, like maybe they could take better care. But from what I understand, they are still paying a decent rate. It's that the labels are still having artists locked into these contracts where the artists and their share is so small and the writer's share is so small.
Right.
But
I think the good news, again, I guess we can look for the silver lining, is that it's forcing some transformation, some repositioning, in order for us all to survive, we're going to have to restructure the way we do business because we can't be doing it the way it was. It's not sustainable.
I think all labels are now, for the most part, are marketing companies anyway. Right. So yeah, I don't know, but yeah, I don't know where the music industry is going to go. Like even if there's the vaccine tomorrow and the world goes back to the way it was, I don't know what the recording industry, the record industry, touring is, I think, going to be what it is when it's safe to tour again. But as far as like, I mean, I haven't listened to the radio in years. Like, I used to every week, not only buy records, I would just like listen to hours of like modern rhythm radio, modern rock radio, modern hip hop, R&B, and then some of the Hispanic stations to stay on top of the reggaeton tracks or whatever.
Yeah,
and now,
wow, such an interesting thing. Yeah, because streaming,
I go to Apple Music or Spotify and I just check certain playlists of new music this week in different genres, and that's how I can always make sure that my sample library is current, because I got to be on top of certain trends and like adjust my sample library accordingly. So, but yeah, I don't do that with radio anymore. It's all streaming.
Wow.
Yeah.
Side question. Have you seen We Are Twisted Effing Sister yet?
No, I'm assuming that's a documentary.
Yes. And it's a documentary of the Twisted Sister days before they got signed.
Oh, no shit.
So it's everything that happened until they actually got signed. Nothing about, Stay Hungry, any of the, the album.
Yeah.
And how many times they got shot down and told they sucked. And I don't remember if it was Doug Morris or who was president at the time, but the reason why it's called Twisted Effing Sister, We Are Twisted Effing Sister, is whoever the president of the label was, because Randy Jackson was like, you guys gotta, because they were on Atlantic Zebra, and like, you gotta do this. And they're like, the president, and it might have been Doug or not, said, if you bring me that band Twisted fucking Sister again, you're fired. And told everybody in there that, and it was Atlantic that actually said that, and the A&R guy that actually signed them was from England. And he came over and saw, I was like, what is this? Brought it to me. He's like, didn't you know what I said about that? Because, dude, like, no. Do you want to make money or not? Yeah. But like their story, I think you'd really get a kick out of. And I as a personal development tool, I share it and I tell all my clients to watch it, because it shows how important it is to just believe in yourself and just keep doing it. Just keep at it. And I mean, we've all experienced that.
I've not with that, but I'm going to watch that. Thanks for that. But I'm sure you've had the same talk with musician friends. I have friends that they've gotten, even one friend that got a major label deal beating all the odds, but that fell apart. And they're like, I'm quitting music. And I'm like, listen, like, and I'll send them a copy of the famous Beatles rejection letter. It was saying, not only was it so like they missed the mark by saying like this band sucks, but also guitar music is a passing fad. Like it was just like I don't know who the person was who wrote that letter, but they like how once like after 1964 they were probably like, you know, how self-doubt after that must have been huge. But there's that. But then also like I don't know if you ever worked with Layla Hathaway, but she's now a huge multiple Grammy-winning singer. But I went to Berklee with her and her sister Kenya, and I always use Layla as an example because she was Donny Hathaway's daughter. So right there, music royalty, and good-looking, amazing singer, and really well trained because of being at Berklee. And I was like, this person is a star. They're going to be huge as soon as they leave Berklee. And I remember she got a major label deal, and I remember seeing her on doing some TV, and I was like, and I was psyched. I was like, yeah, they're like, she's going to blow up, but she didn't. It just, she maintained a career, but it was never like, it was just building up a cult following, and also having certain advocates like Stevie Wonder and Prince were big fans, and Prince would have her open up. But still, like, she never became a household name. And then like 25 years later, she sang on the Snarky Puppy record, and she did this one thing where she sang a harmonic, like 2 notes at once. It's kind of like, I think like tube and throat singing, that kind of thing. And the video of that went viral. And also that performance won a Grammy. And then it also is one of these like an overnight sensation, but no, she had been signed to a major label, had been like doing her thing for decades, but just that was things finally came together for her. And then I think for like the next few years, she won multiple Grammys every year, and then was also like an A-list, like, I don't know if she's categorized as like jazz or R&B or both, but like she now is in the place that she rightfully deserves. But it's like if she had given up after her first record didn't do as well as the label had hoped, and and like things didn't, whatever. It's just like, so I always use her as an example. Like, she just did her thing, and she did it for the right reasons, and she's a musician. She had to keep doing it. But I love that it's not quite the same thing as like facing rejection, and like with what you're talking with Twisted Sister, where they were like, no, what we do really well. We're going to keep doing it.
Yeah. Well, but the thing is, I think ultimately it's our internal dialogue, our internal narrative, like you were sharing earlier, that takes us out of the game. Yeah. And we already have, there's enough external stuff coming in to give us excuses anyway. And that's the purpose of why, even created this show, is to show that everybody has all the same stuff going on outside, especially now. There's things that happen, but it's how we process it, what decisions we make, what we think about it, what are we believing that prevent us or not from making the next thing happen. And to keep pressing on, because there are people who, I'm sure you've seen, who took way less negative feedback and used as an excuse to give up. Yeah.
And and some of the most successful people I've seen are not necessarily the best at what they do, but they're
the most persistent.
Yeah. And because that goes back to like, and I won't get too deep into it for the sake of time, but my mother was an extremely talented visual artist, but I remember her saying she would kind of always have a bit of sadness about like the people, when she went to art college, she was she was like the one, like, right. I think he was one of the most talented people. And then she had people, her contemporaries, who weren't necessarily as talented as her, were having much more successful careers. And I remember her saying something along the lines of like it's not just about how good you are. Like, you have to put yourself out there. And which it was kind of like do as I say, not as I do, because she never really put herself out there as she could have. But that's a whole other.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
But yeah, I've seen that time and time again of some of the people that are the most successful are absolutely the best at what they do, but there are a lot of people that are not, and they've just like they have that unwavering commitment to themselves and to their self-belief. So
right.
Yeah.
And that's what we need, I think, right now is now more than ever is to enhance and develop that faith and belief in ourselves and that faith and belief in others, and knowing that we'll figure it out, that we are still bigger than any problem that could ever come our way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Simple, not easy.
Yeah, exactly. So, but if you practice every day, it gets easier. That goes back to the whole. And here's another analogy which you'll get because you've performed live. It's like you have your practice room chops and your chops on the bandstand or in the studio, whatever. But a lot of, and because I remember when you asked me to do this, I listened to the first episode and it was you and your wife talking about like your relationship in the early days of it, and how like a lot of the work I've done, like there's no better way to really put that stuff into practice than being in a relationship, because a lot of the things that you think you have together, you're great when you're by yourself,
right?
Under ideal circumstances where everything's exactly the way you want it and you have 100% control of everything. But all of a sudden when you're in a partnership, that's when your shit is really put to the test.
Oh yeah.
Especially if it's a partner where you guys have that polarity where you can like touch each other's like deepest core wounds. So
which is always a great opportunity to grow from.
It totally. So but I would not have had that like perspective about that pre-therapy and developing the like just a practice approach. Yeah.
Well, so. One of the things when you shared like the chops, and I don't know, the relevance to it for me was kind of like it's always important to be your best, right? Yeah. So even behind, it's like think of it like of an integrity conversation.
Yeah.
I was in this band Fat, and you guys, do you remember? Yeah. So I after we made the record, I went on the road with them, and so I was a bass player in it. And what we would do is we go to rehearsal before the tour, and we go, okay, we'd whatever 2 weeks or a week or whatever rehearsals, and then every time we did it, first song was tune-up song. So we we're like, okay, we're good, everything's all the gears working, the loops were great. The rest of the rehearsal was as if we were playing in front of 15,000 people.
Yeah.
Jumping, like playing it as if we were in front of everybody.
Yeah.
So that what would happen is when we would go out live, it was like a Memorex commercial because we didn't have to turn it on necessarily anymore. It was just we had more feedback, so it was even bigger. But we had so much like physical mastery of the jumping and the running and the energy.
Yeah, but that being said, there's all the Murphy's Law thing of you're playing live, your monitor goes out or whatever. That's when being in the field really helps you help whatever. If there were any like chinks in your armor, that's where you work.
That's when they come out. Oh yeah. I remember one time we were playing, and I did one of those things where you jump up on the drum riser and then jump off, and I fell when I landed, just face planted in the right, but got up, and again physical mastery, kept the energy, had the momentum, so it was totally okay. But that's that's going to happen no matter what. Meaning things happen.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, is there anything coming up that, records that you've worked on that you can share that are coming out soon that we can keep an ear out, or what is some of your favorite records that you've worked on as well that we could maybe go back and.
I got to say, like, I love every record I've done, for even the ones that like, I didn't even necessarily like the music because the hang or whatever, or the producer or something. But some of my favorite records, as far as like what I'm most proud of musically, are not the most successful. Like like I have in New York and my place, I have like when you first thing you see when you walk in is like wall to wall platinum records. And I don't listen to any of that stuff.
Right.
That stuff is there as kind of like to remind me, like it's to help with the imposter syndrome that I don't feel as much as I used to, but I for years struggled with.
Right.
So it's for that. And it's also just, it's a marketing tool, because if I have somebody that's coming over to discuss a project, it's like they walk in and it's like, there's my Harvard law degree, so to speak.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like, it's all there. But I don't necessarily like love those records. They're all really well made. But I gotta say, the record I was just talking about, that Alex Iona record, I'm really proud of. And not coincidentally, Billy Mann was a producer, and one of my favorite records is Billy Mann's second solo album when he was still part of the, I forget, it was like DV8 Records or something, which I think
DV8.
was that Rick Wake's label?
Yeah, it was DV8 and A&M.
Yeah, A&M.
Yeah, that was with that we were signed to that.
Exactly. And unfortunately, I think DV8 didn't know how to work the record. It was just but it was Billy's record. It was a great record, and it came together in a really almost magical way. Like we all flew to LA and like had a limited amount of time. We were working with like an A-list producer at the time, but I just think the budget was still limited. We had to get all the basics done like back to back.
I worked on the first record, I don't think on the second one.
Yeah. And I did a couple tracks on the first record after the fact. And you may have been in there, but I think Bob Cadaway was. Yeah,
probably Bobby.
Yeah. I think it was a co-op actually. So, so Billy's record and Jive's record, like there was something about that record that like, even though it's got its flaws, there was just something really special about that record and how it came together. Yeah. And that it could be more about like the spiritual aspect than the musical aspect, because it's like I hear it and it reminds me of certain things. But I also think musically there was some like really cool risk happening in that music. And also Jive is a really talented guy, you know what I mean? Like despite he does a lot of things that maybe are not technically correct.
That's what I appreciated about him, that his willingness to go, I don't care, like I like it.
Just his musical instincts. The ears are monstrous. So I don't know if Job's watching, but big props.
Well, I reached out to him again. We're gonna have to do a full court press to reconnect. I'd love to. I spoke to him like 2 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, I saw him in person. I don't know how many years ago in New York after I hadn't seen him for years. But super talented guy. So Jive's record, Billy's record. I mean, there's too many to mention, because like any record I do with friends, like I love those records. Right. But I don't know, there's, and I just heard a friend of mine is a big British touring drummer, Steve Barney, and he posted a thing. He played with Annie Lennox after I did, but he toured the band called Sugar. They were huge in the UK, not in the States. That Luke produced a couple, like it was a #1 single, and I think the other singles as well. But I worked on those, and I forgot about those. And he just posted him playing on like Top of the Pops with them in like 2008. And I was like, I haven't thought about that song since then. And I was like, it's not even the kind of music I like, but it was a really good record. So I think honestly, pretty much every record I've done, I have a fondness for. Yeah. But I think just that Billy's record and Jive's record are like two that just, there was something really special about how those were made and how they came together. And then, but this kid Alex Iona's record, it just dropped. It's called Gospel at 23. It's a really cool record in that he's somebody that, if you listen to his past records, very modern, like pop R&B production. This was just him singing vocals, piano, and drums, but the drums are literally just me playing a bass drum with a mallet. Wow. I overdubbed some tambourine, and the keyboard player overdubbed some B3, but it's essentially piano, bass drum, vocals, and then a gospel choir. Wow, cool. Doing clapping on the backbeats. So there's live group hand claps, and a gospel choir doing backgrounds, but that's the entire record, and which is a very risky move for like a guy known as a pop artist. Yeah. But it's getting a lot of love. So I'm really proud of that, and proud to be part of that. And then Ray Angry, I don't know if Ray, I don't think to New York until after you were gone, but he's part of the Roots crew. So or when they were doing the Tonight Show with, I think he's been back there. So he tours with the Roots, and he's one of the keyboard players that does. It's he and James Poyser, I think, are the main two guys in the Roots. So Ray does that, but Ray's also, he's like kind of like Sean Pelton. He's like one of the most working guys in the music industry. Ray, as a musical director and as a keyboard player and as a producer, his resume is just crazy, and he's worked with everyone. So Ray and I have become good friends over the years, and so I worked on. He has a new record coming out, and it's a protest song. It's part of the whole pushback against systemic racism and police brutality. So the song is called "Welcome to My Life," and I think parentheses is "Don't Shoot." So I did some programming on that track, and I think it's coming out on S Curve.
Okay.
Is S Curve because that's Joss Stone was S Curve.
Yeah.
I forget. But anyway, I think it's coming out on S Curve. It's Ray with Imani Coppola. You probably worked with her.
Yes. Yeah, I did. Yes, at Dream Factory.
Dream Factory, exactly.
Yeah.
She co-wrote it and sings on it. It's a really cool track, kind of like a modern retro vibe. So that they just shot the video in New York, and I'm not sure when the official release of the single is, but that's soon. I'm really proud of that track, and then a bunch of I've been doing some, like I said, some indie stuff, just working on tracks. There's stuff coming out, but I never know like when. Most things I don't know when they're going to come out. But those are two things that I'm sure of. And then like I said, I've friends of mine that we've talked about collaborating forever, like Charlie Hunter, who plays guitar and bass at the same time. Really, I don't know if you ever checked him out. Check out his videos; it's pretty unbelievable. But Heavy Cat was signed to Blue Note Records for years in the jazz world, but he also worked on D'Angelo Voodoo. And before that, just a long history. Huge resume also, but like his thing is because he plays guitar and bass at once, he'll tour with just duos where it's just him and a drummer, and the drummers he's worked with is astonishing. And but we have some mutual friends. Adam Dorn, I think, introduced us, and Scott Amendola is another drummer I went to Berkeley with who played with him. So we met, and it came up like we were saying, yeah, we'd love to work together. And I was like, yeah, like you've worked with all my friends. Like I don't even know. And that came back to the self-sabotage thing.
Wow.
Where he reminded me, he's like, hey man, every drummer has their own thing. And I was like, oh, you're right. But now that this is happening, I was like, hey, I have this programming rig, and he's somebody that never had a home recording rig, and now he has a home recording rig. And I was like,
so instant collabs.
Like maybe I'll just send you some beats. So we're talking about like doing a collaboration with that. And a few other friends, same thing. We're just talking about like, if this thing's going to go on indefinitely, let's just send each other shit and start. So hopefully I'll be doing something with Charlie coming up soon. And yeah, those are like the immediate things on my plate right now. But yeah, as far as if people want to check out records, look for Ray Angry. And you can find him on, I think everybody's on all like the regular Tidal. Is Tidal still a thing? I think it is. But Tidal is like I think it's like Jay-Z's and a couple other like big name music people. It's their own streaming platform.
Oh, okay.
But it's like the artist-owned streaming platform. But there's Apple Music, Tidal, Spotify, and YouTube. So Alex Iono, Gospel 23, and then Ray Angry. Look for his record soon. So
groovy on it, and I am so blessed because the Jive record definitely was a very cool time of my life to sharing it with you and Jive and you know, all the stuff we were doing then. And I'm proud that that was one that is as near and dear to you as it was is to me, and such an amazing time.
Those were like almost like a family production, because it was like a little bit of a family for a minute. So yeah. And I think that's also with Billy, because it was Billy, me, Adam Dorn, who we all played together in high school. I think it's that kind of thing. Because like I said, every record I've worked on, even the stuff that I don't listen to, like on my wall, those are great records. Like, and I had fun working on them because of the people that were in the room. You know, you know how it is with a big pop artist. The artist is usually not even there, but it's like the producer, the engineer, like the assistant engineer, and if there are other musicians there, like that's it's the hang.
Right.
So like, but yeah, the family records like Jives and Billy's, those are two of my favorites. So
awesome, brother.
yeah.
Well, dude, any final words to words of wisdom that would something we could nosh on as we wrap this up? I mean, I really appreciate you, you know, like spending your time here. I know whenever we talk, we end up talking for hours anyway.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, no, I appreciate you asking me to do it. And I mean, words. I have different words of wisdom for different audiences.
Whatever calls you.
I don't know. A big philosophy of mine has been, I found a book. Did we talk about the book Essentialism?
No.
I've kind of been like, in my life over the years, more and more having this philosophy of fewer, better ingredients, like literally for cooking or figuratively for anything, for music production, for your home decor, whatever. Yeah, just declutter your life and just like, what are the essentials that like, and have fewer, better quality ingredients and everything. So I always pass that along to people, but there's a book based on that I discovered recently called Essentialism. It's pretty cool. And also I'm starting to lose my voice, so hydrate. I mean, I think most people do not drink enough water. So,
agreed.
Yeah. And everybody wear a fucking mask. So that's the other. Oh, sorry. Am I allowed to curse?
You can say here? Mask.
No. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And that's it. Yeah. And just, I don't know, everybody strive to be the best version of yourself, because the world is nothing but a collective of individuals. So
that's, collective consciousness.
Be the change, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Right. Yes. We know where all these are going.
Yes.
And that's the thing. Like, what's crazy is they're cliches because they're true.
Yeah. So true. So, and the thing is, all of these cliches that I've known for years, you know, the more you learn, the more like they just take on deeper meaning, and the less you realize, you know. So
right. Oh my gosh, that's another reason why I do this. Like, these questions are usually, you know, well, always, like, I'm genuinely curious. Like, I want to learn. I want to grow. I know that I have so much more to learn, and if others can benefit from the recording of it, then awesome. Yeah.
No. Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. This is definitely different from I've been doing a lot of these like in the last few years, but it's all like drumistic or music business. So this was the first. So thanks for having me on this.
Oh, dude, thank you. I love you, brother. This is
dude, and thanks again. I'm forever indebted to you for like getting me like off and running with Pro Tools, and also I got to say Core Transformation, which is
that book. Yep,
it's one of the books that I don't recommend every book I've read to people, but that's one that I've recommended. And the thing is, I didn't even finish it. I just
once you got the concept, you're like, oh wait, this makes sense.
And I started putting it into practice, and it worked. So yeah,
I do that process still to this day so many times with other people. Like, just we got to do some parts work here.
Yeah, totally. So.
Yeah. Awesome, brother. Well, thank you so much. And as always, my resources are your resources. So anything I can do to support you, please reach out.
Likewise. Thank you.
Awesome, brother. I will see you very soon.
Cool.
Rock, brother. Peace.